On a glittering night in Manhattan, the powerful Whitmore family thought they were untouchable. Surrounded by chandeliers, champagne, and the eyes of New York's elite, they mocked a black woman, dismissing her as if she didn't belong. But what they didn't know was that this woman, Dr. Kesha Washington, wasn't just another guest. She was the force that would dismantle their billion-dollar empire in front of the entire world. This is the story of how arrogance met accountability, and lost. The champagne flutes clinked like crystal bells under the glow of chandeliers, the kind that could make an entire night feel like it belonged to a fairy tale. The Meridian Club penthouse was no ordinary ballroom, it was Manhattan's shrine to old money, polished marble and crystal reflecting the power of legacies that spanned centuries. Tonight, the Whitmore family, pillars of that legacy, were hosting their annual charity gala. It wasn't just about philanthropy, it was about power theater. The guest list was curated like a museum exhibit, each name adding weight to the Whitmore brand. Victoria Whitmore, sharp in a velvet gown the color of midnight, spotted her target immediately. The woman in the elegant but understated black dress, standing with a simple clutch, seemed almost invisible against the glitz. Almost. Victoria's voice cut through the chatter, "Excuse me. I don't recall seeing your name on our guest list." The entire circle of Manhattan elite stilled, conversations pausing like strings on a violin waiting for the next note. The woman met her gaze, steady, unflinching. Her poise was disarming, not the kind born of practiced privilege but of earned confidence. "Perhaps you should check again," she said calmly. Dr. Kesha Washington. It was not the name that shocked the crowd, but the certainty with which she said it. She carried herself like someone used to commanding boardrooms, not asking permission for entry. Catherine Whitmore, matriarch and master of old money etiquette, slid next to her daughter. Pearls glittered against her throat as her lips curled into a condescending smile. "The help should know their place," she whispered, loud enough for the nearest circle to hear. Her grandson, Marcus Jr., grinned wickedly, phone already out, recording. "Dad, security," he muttered gleefully. His Instagram story was about to be content gold. James Whitmore Sr., bow tie neat, Rolex catching the chandelier light, gave a curt nod to the guards. They approached, black suits moving like shadows trained for quiet authority. The Whitmores formed a semicircle of disdain, suffocating in its unity. The crowd leaned in, the first scent of scandal perfuming the air. Dr. Washington adjusted her clutch, the steel of her watch flashing under the lights. "Have you ever been so underestimated," she murmured softly, her voice carrying, "that people couldn't see the power standing right in front of them?" Phones lifted higher. The performance had begun. The taller guard stepped forward, his voice even but firm. "Ma'am, we'll need to see your invitation." His hand rested lightly on the radio clipped to his belt, a gesture designed to project authority without escalating, yet. Kesha's movements were unhurried, deliberate. She slipped her hand into her clutch, drew out a cream-colored card embossed with gold lettering, and handed it over. The guard studied it, frowning, then nodded slowly. "This appears to be legitimate." "Appears?" Catherine Whitmore's laugh rang out, brittle and sharp. "James, darling, didn't the club just update their security protocols? These things can be forged." Her tone was honey dipped in arsenic, perfectly crafted to humiliate while preserving plausible deniability. James Sr. straightened, his boardroom presence radiating over the crowd. "Sometimes invitations get misplaced or photocopied," he said loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. The accusation hung in the air, poisonous, infecting the murmurs of the audience. Marcus Jr. tilted his phone for the perfect shot. "Content gold," he whispered, his feed already climbing past 10,000 live views. The chat scrolled with laughing emojis, mixed with a few warning voices drowned out in the noise. "I can verify my attendance," Kesha said evenly, her voice steady against the rising tide of mockery. Victoria crossed her arms, a smirk tugging at her lips. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? Do you have references from our board members?" Sponsorship documents? The cruelty in her tone was no accident. This was theater, and she was the star, relishing the scene. The crowd tightened around them, a living ring of privilege ready to see whether this intruder would be expelled or crushed beneath the Whitmore name. To them, this wasn't about security, it was a public trial. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a respected surgeon and guest of honor, stepped forward cautiously. "Victoria, perhaps we should." "With all due respect, Elizabeth," Catherine snapped, cutting her off with surgical precision. "We have protocols. The reputation of this foundation depends on standards." The words were coded, but not subtle. Standards. Reputation. Caliber. Everyone in the room heard what was really being said. A black woman didn't belong here. The tension spiked when a server stumbled, bumping Kesha's clutch. A business card fluttered to the marble floor, landing at the guard's feet. He picked it up, read aloud, "Washington Capital Management." Marcus Jr. zoomed in eagerly. "Never heard of it," Victoria said dismissively, waving her hand as if swatting a fly. But in the digital crowd, people were already Googling. The comments on Marcus Jr.'s live stream lit up. "Bro, that's a $50 billion firm, dummy. She owns half Wall Street, are they insane?" The Whitmores, cocooned in marble and chandeliers, were oblivious to the storm brewing online. "Ma'am, let's handle this privately," the second guard said, gesturing discreetly toward the service elevators. Kesha tilted her head, lips curving into the faintest smile. "Privately?" Her tone was conversational, but there was steel in it, steel that made the guards hesitate. She glanced at her watch. "You said the announcement is in 13 minutes, wasn't it, Mr. Whitmore?" James Sr. checked his cufflinks impatiently. "Correct. And we can't afford delays." "Perfect," Kesha murmured, dialing a number with calm precision. Her voice carried across the penthouse. "Hello, Marcus." "Yes, I know you're in prep, but we need to discuss Meridian." The silence that followed was absolute. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. The Bloomberg reporter in the corner sat bolt upright. James Sr.'s face drained of color. Marcus Jr. lowered his phone, confusion dawning. Catherine fanned herself nervously. Kesha's voice was steady, surgical. "Yes, I understand the contracts were signed. But circumstances have changed." It was then, at that precise moment, that the air in the room shifted. The powerful Whitmores, who had spent their lives commanding deference, suddenly realized they were prey. "Excuse me, miss, who exactly are you calling?" James Sr.'s voice cracked, betraying a tremor of fear beneath the cultivated polish of decades in boardrooms. Kesha raised one elegant finger, an almost casual gesture that nevertheless halted him mid-step. The room reacted in collective shock, not because she silenced him, but because James Whitmore, patriarch of one of New York's most powerful dynasties, actually obeyed. Phones were raised higher, streaming the moment in real time. The Instagram viewer count surged past 25,000, comments exploding with speculation. "She said Meridian? OMG, this about to be huge. She's somebody powerful, watch. Whitmore fam is done, this is historic." Victoria clutched her father's arm. "Daddy, what's Meridian Industries? Should we know them?" Her question was whispered, but the marble acoustics carried it across the room. Marcus Jr.'s smirk faltered as he scrolled his phone, his fingers shaking when the search results loaded. His face drained of color. He whispered, "Oh God." Catherine blinked rapidly, pearls trembling at her throat. "James, isn't Meridian our announcement tonight?" The Bloomberg reporter, David Kim, was typing furiously now. His headline was already taking shape: Whitmore Gala erupts into chaos as mysterious guest mentions Meridian. Meanwhile, Kesha's voice carried evenly across the silence. "Yes, Marcus. The withdrawal must be immediate. The Whitmore partnership is no longer viable." The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps rippled across the crowd. A champagne flute slipped from Victoria's hand, shattering against the marble. No one moved to clean it. "What did you say?" James Sr. lurched forward, his face ashen. "Cancel it," Kesha repeated calmly into her phone. "All $1.2 billion. Execute the withdrawal immediately." The chandelier light glinted off her watch as if punctuating each syllable. James Sr. swayed, clutching a pillar for support. His daughter's manicured nails dug crescent moons into his sleeve. "Daddy, what does that mean? Withdrawal?" Her voice was shrill now, desperation seeping through the cracks of entitlement. The security guards shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer a simple escort. This was something far bigger, beyond their pay grade. Kesha ended her call with a gentle click and slipped her phone back into her clutch, as if she had merely ordered a bottle of wine. Then she looked up, her gaze landing on James Sr. with the precision of a scalpel. "You were saying something about forged invitations, Mr. Whitmore?" The silence was so complete that the sound of David Kim's laptop keys clacking seemed deafening. Every eye in the room was on her, the mysterious woman who had just dismantled a billion-dollar announcement with a phone call. Catherine fanned herself frantically. "Who is this woman?" Dr. Elizabeth Carter stepped forward, her voice carrying clarity where others faltered. "Allow me." She looked directly at Kesha, her tone reverent. "Dr. Kesha Washington, CEO of Washington Capital Management." The name struck the room like thunder rolling over marble. Murmurs broke out instantly. "Washington Capital? That's the $50 billion firm. Oh my God, I've read about her in Forbes." Marcus Jr.'s phone buzzed violently with notifications. His followers had found the Forbes article faster than he had. The headline glared up at him, "The Woman Who Rebuilt American Manufacturing." His stomach twisted. He had filmed himself mocking her, broadcasting it to hundreds of thousands. James Sr.'s lips parted, struggling for words. "Dr. Washington?" "Yes." Her reply was calm, final, like a gavel striking wood. Gasps cascaded across the crowd as realization rippled through them. This wasn't just a guest. This was a woman who held the power to move markets, to make or break dynasties. And the Whitmores had just treated her like an intruder. David Kim hit publish. Notifications flashed across phones in the room as the Bloomberg alert went live. The headline screamed, "Breaking, $1.2 billion Meridian deal jeopardized after gala confrontation with Whitmore family." The Whitmores had hosted the party to cement their legacy. Instead, they had invited their downfall. The marble penthouse was no longer a ballroom, it had become a courtroom. And every guest, every phone, every streaming eye online was a juror. James Sr.'s voice quavered as he tried to muster authority. "Dr. Washington, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "One moment," Kesha said, raising that same finger again. The gesture silenced him instantly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority radiated from her like heat off steel. She glanced at her understated steel watch. 7 minutes until your announcement, I believe. The one about Meridian." Her words, casual in tone, fell heavy as anvils. "I do hope you've prepared a backup." The event coordinator's voice crackled through her headset in the corner, 7 minutes to announce. The urgency in her tone carried across the floor. Everyone knew there was no backup. This announcement was the crown jewel of the Whitmore's year, the very reason for the gala. Catherine gripped her pearls so tightly her knuckles went white. You can't just cancel something of this magnitude." "Can't?" Kesha tilted her head, her expression serene, almost amused. "Mrs. Whitmore, Washington Capital doesn't deal in can't. We deal in results. And right now, the result is clear, a termination." The murmurs swelled. Guests exchanged looks, some gleeful at seeing the mighty Whitmores fall, others horrified at the corporate bloodbath unfolding before their eyes. David Kim's fingers flew across his laptop. His second article draft was already forming: mystery woman identified as billionaire investor. Washington Capital CEO cancels Whitmore gala deal. James Sr. clung to the last vestiges of control. You don't understand, this deal is critical to thousands of jobs, to community programs. Surely, you wouldn't. Don't insult me with theatrics, Kesha said softly, but her voice carried across the marble hall as though amplified. I know your numbers, Mr. Whitmore. Q3 revenue, $847 million. This Meridian partnership represented 142% of that in future commitments. Without it, Whitmore Industries faces restructuring challenges you are ill-prepared to manage. The words weren't just insults. They were data. Precision bombs of fact. And every financial mind in the room understood exactly what she was doing. Victoria's face blanched. How do you even know those numbers? Kesha's smile was razor-thin. Public filings. SEC documents. Information your son could have Googled in 30 seconds instead of live-streaming his mockery to the world. The camera phones captured every flicker of humiliation on the Whitmores' faces. Online, hashtags ignited like wildfire, hashtag Whitmore racist, hashtag Washington Capital, hashtag Queen Kesha. 6 minutes to announcement, the coordinator whispered, panic threading her voice. The guards shifted uneasily. One muttered into his earpiece, "Control, we might need the manager up here." But even they sensed that their employers were no longer the ones in charge. Kesha's clutch snapped softly as she withdrew a folded document. Cream-colored stock, thick, expensive, embossed with Washington Capital's insignia. She held it delicately between manicured fingers, letting the suspense build like a violin string pulled taut. "There's something else you should know," she said. Her calm tone contrasted violently with the storm her words unleashed. The Whitmores froze, every muscle tight with dread. Kesha unfolded the paper with deliberate care. The sound of crisp fibers tearing apart the silence echoed through the room like thunder. She looked up, her eyes scanning the family one by one. Washington Capital doesn't just control the Meridian partnership. She paused, her smile returning, calm, unsettling, inevitable. We also own 34.7% of Whitmore Industries itself. The revelation hit like a nuclear blast. Gasps tore through the room. Catherine staggered, clutching her pearls as if they could anchor her to reality. Victoria dropped into a nearby chair, her gown spilling around her like deflated pride. Marcus Jr.'s phone slipped from his hands and shattered on the marble floor, the final insult to his digital bravado. James Sr. looked like he had been struck physically, his bow tie suddenly strangling instead of dignifying. He whispered, "Impossible." "Not impossible," Kesha corrected gently. Documented. SEC Form 13D, filed 18 months ago. A series of strategic acquisitions through subsidiaries. Quiet. Legal. Effective. She tapped the paper. "This is your reality, Mr. Whitmore." David Kim's eyes widened. His headline shifted in his mind instantly: hostile takeover? Washington Capital emerges as largest Whitmore shareholder. His hands shook as he typed. He knew this was career-defining. Marcus Jr. choked on his own words. That makes you the largest single shareholder." "Yes," Kesha said simply. "Which means, in essence, you all work for me." The gasp that followed wasn't just sound, it was history folding in on itself. The empire of the Whitmores, 3 generations built on arrogance and power, had just been swallowed whole by a woman they had tried to humiliate. And every camera caught the moment their dynasty cracked. Phones buzzed across the marble penthouse like angry hornets, each vibration a reminder that the world outside this chandeliered bubble was already watching, judging, recording. The Instagram live view count soared past 100,000. TikTok clips circulated within minutes. Twitter hashtags detonated, hashtag Whitmore exposed, hashtag Washington Capitol, hashtag Billionaire meltdown. David Kim's Bloomberg article hit feeds, its headline brutal: Whitmore gala implodes as Washington Capitol CEO cancels $1.2 billion deal, reveals major stake in Whitmore Industries. CNBC picked it up within seconds. Guests' phones lit up with push notifications. Manhattan's elite were no longer simply witnesses, they were conduits, feeding the story to the hungry world beyond. Victoria, pale and trembling, tried to salvage the family's dignity. "Dr. Washington," she stammered, "surely there's a way we can resolve this misunderstanding." "Perhaps, privately." "Privately?" Kesha's laugh was soft, almost musical, but it sliced through the air like a blade. "No, Ms. Whitmore. Your family chose to humiliate me publicly. Transparency is the only fitting response." Her words echoed in the marble chamber, amplified by architecture designed to glorify the voices of the powerful. Now, that same design betrayed the Whitmores. 5 minutes to announcement, the coordinator whispered into her headset, her face ashen. James Sr., desperation cracking his composure, tried again. "Please. You have to understand. This company employs 23,000 people. You'd risk all that for what? For revenge? Revenge?" Kesha's brow lifted slightly, her voice calm. "No, Mr. Whitmore. This isn't revenge. This is accountability. Washington Capitol's mission is clear: to build partnerships rooted in equity and responsibility. Tonight, you revealed precisely what values your family stands for." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the violinist in the corner faltered, bow hovering over strings, as if unwilling to soundtrack the death of an empire. Catherine finally broke, her pearls rattling against her chest as she clutched them like a rosary. "James, do something." But there was nothing left to do. Not when the world had already witnessed their downfall. The Bloomberg article was followed by Reuters. Washington Capitol's Dr. Kesha Washington calls emergency board meeting, Whitmore leadership in jeopardy. CNBC ran the clip of Victoria sneering, "The help should know their place," side by side with Kesha's calm declaration of 34.7% ownership. By the time Fox Business and CNN joined in, the story had become a media firestorm. Meanwhile, on social media, commentary boiled. "Historic. First time I've ever seen privilege collapse in real time. She owns them. Literally owns them. Poetic justice. The Whitmores messed with the wrong woman." Marcus Jr. retrieved his cracked phone, his fingers trembling as he scrolled. His live stream had been screen-recorded, reposted, shared across platforms. One TikTok clip of him mocking Kesha, captioned, "When you laugh at the boss without realizing she is the boss," had already reached 2 million views. His legacy, once destined for Wall Street, was now cemented as a meme. Kesha snapped her clutch closed and took one graceful step forward, her gaze sweeping the stunned family. "Monday morning, 9 a.m., she said evenly. "Emergency board meeting. Attendance is not optional." James Sr. blinked. "Board meeting?" "Yes," Kesha replied. "To discuss leadership changes, governance reforms, and compliance with federal anti-discrimination statutes. I trust you'll be punctual." The guests erupted into a buzz of whispers, every word captured on phones and microphones. Some tried to hide their glee, longtime rivals who had waited decades for the Whitmores' arrogance to collapse. Others watched with horror, realizing they were witnessing not just humiliation but a restructuring of power itself. The coordinator's voice quavered, 3 minutes to announcement. "There will be no announcement," Kesha said calmly, tucking the legal document back into her clutch. "Meridian is gone. And soon, so will your titles. The Whitmores stood paralyzed, their empire disintegrating under the weight of a truth broadcast to millions. For decades, they had controlled the narrative. Tonight, they had lost it. Forever. The following morning, New York's financial district woke to chaos. Wall Street Journal, Washington Capitol moves against Whitmore dynasty. New York Post, billion-dollar backfire, how a gala became a guillotine. But the true reckoning was yet to come. Monday morning arrived like a storm, even though the sky over Manhattan was blue and deceptively calm. On the 42nd floor of Whitmore Industries headquarters, the boardroom felt more like a courtroom awaiting judgment. The mahogany-paneled walls, once symbols of enduring power, pressed down like prison bars. For the Whitmores, this was no longer their kingdom, it was a holding cell. James Sr. sat stiffly at the head of the long polished table, but the posture was hollow. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted cufflinks that no longer shone with authority. To his left, Victoria stared at her reflection in a glass of untouched water, her mascara smudged from a sleepless night. Catherine clutched her pearls, as if the gesture might protect her from what was coming. Marcus Jr. kept his head down, scrolling through his phone, the glow of his cracked screen illuminating the collapse of his reputation, memes, headlines, and hashtags that had turned his name into a punchline. The other board members filed in, exchanging hushed whispers, eyes darting between the Whitmores and the empty chair across the table. They knew. Everyone knew. The entire financial world had spent the weekend dissecting Dr. Kesha Washington's every word, every move. Her revelation of 34.7% ownership wasn't just gossip, it was a seismic shift in corporate power. The door opened at precisely 9 a.m. Dr. Kesha Washington stepped inside, flanked by 2 attorneys and a restructuring specialist. She wore the same understated elegance as at the gala, a simple black suit, her steel watch gleaming faintly under the recessed lighting. She didn't need extravagance. Her authority was her adornment. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm, precise, and devastating in its simplicity. She took her seat directly across from James Sr., and in that moment, the symbolism was unavoidable, the old guard facing the new reality. The room held its breath. James Sr. attempted a smile, brittle as cracked porcelain. "Dr. Washington, welcome." "Let's proceed," she interrupted, unfolding a portfolio of documents. "We have a full agenda." Her restructuring specialist slid packets across the table to each board member. The heading read, Emergency Session Agenda, Governance and Compliance Review. Victoria's jaw dropped. "This is absurd. You can't just." "I can," Kesha said evenly, without looking up. "As the largest shareholder, I called this emergency meeting. The bylaws allow it. And unless you'd like me to exercise the hostile takeover option, which I assure you the other shareholders would support, we'll continue." The attorneys at her side nodded. Their silence was louder than shouting. The first vote came swiftly. Victoria's suspension as CEO. The tally was brutal, 6-2 in favor. Victoria's face drained of color. "You can't suspend me. This is my company." Kesha looked up at her, eyes sharp as a blade. "No, Ms. Whitmore. It's not. Not anymore. You were CEO. As of this moment, your leadership is under review." The second vote followed, Marcus Jr.'s removal as COO. It passed unanimously. His phone slipped from his hand again, clattering against the table. He didn't even try to pick it up. Then Catherine. Her resignation from the Whitmore Foundation's board was accepted without discussion. Her pearls rattled in her grip, their sheen dulled by panic. Finally, James Sr. The vote stripped him of his voting privileges for 6 months, leaving him a figurehead with no power. One by one, the pillars of the Whitmore dynasty crumbled in full view of their peers. The empire that had taken a century to build was dismantled in less than 30 minutes. Kesha folded her hands calmly. The reforms I proposed will be implemented within 30 days. First, a $50 million minority business development fund. Second, mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all senior management. Third, comprehensive compliance monitoring to ensure this company never again undermines its employees or its partners through prejudice. You can't dictate that, Victoria snapped, her voice breaking. Yes, I can, Kesha replied smoothly. And I will. The board members nodded. Some looked relieved. Others looked terrified. But none challenged her. James Sr. slumped in his chair, decades of control draining away. You'll ruin us, he whispered. No, Kesha said, her tone still calm, still surgical. I'll save you, from yourselves. You confused arrogance for strength. You confused prejudice for power. And you thought wealth insulated you from consequence. She leaned forward, every eye locked on her. But the truth is simple. You don't run Whitmore Industries anymore. I do. The room sat in stunned silence. Outside the windows, the Manhattan skyline glinted with cold sunlight, indifferent to the fall of a dynasty. The boardroom adjourned just after 10 a.m., but the echo of its decisions traveled far beyond the mahogany walls. The financial world devoured the news in real time, feeding on every detail like sharks circling fresh blood. CNBC ran with the headline, Washington Capitol seizes control of Whitmore Industries in emergency meeting. Fox Business added their own spin, old money dynasty falls to rising black billionaire. The New York Times went for gravitas, a new era in corporate governance, the Whitmore collapse. But it wasn't the polished articles that cut deepest. It was the memes. Marcus Jr. had become the unwilling face of arrogance undone. A freeze frame of him sneering into his phone at the gala now circulated globally with captions like, "When you mock the boss but she OWNS your company." Another showed him dropping his phone, paired with, "When the Wi-Fi goes out and so does your legacy." His Instagram account, once boasting millions of followers who admired his lifestyle of yachts and designer watches, was now a battlefield. Comments poured in. "Where's the live stream now, Marcus? You laughed at her, now the world's laughing at you. How's it feel being a meme, COO?" By midweek, his sponsors began quietly pulling endorsements. Luxury watch brands deleted old collabs. Nightclubs that once courted his presence now distanced themselves. Even his so-called friends began unfollowing him, fearful that association with his name would stain theirs. Victoria fared no better. Business blogs dissected her every sneer from the gala footage. One viral TikTok stitched her dismissive, "The help should know their place," with clips of Kesha calmly announcing her ownership stake. The contrast was devastating. Overnight, Victoria transformed from powerful CEO to case study in hubris. But while the Whitmores drowned in digital humiliation, Kesha's reforms began reshaping the company. The $50 million minority business development fund launched within 72 hours, Washington Capitol seeding it with immediate cash. Applications flooded in, black-owned suppliers, Latino contractors, indigenous entrepreneurs, people who had never before dreamed of landing Whitmore contracts now saw doors opening. Mandatory sensitivity training began that Wednesday. Executives accustomed to marble boardrooms now sat in conference rooms, forced to confront unconscious bias with Harvard Business School facilitators. Some sneered. Others squirmed. A few wept. Every session was recorded, archived, and tied to their employment contracts. Employee chatter inside Whitmore Industries shifted. For years, whispers of discrimination and favoritism had been buried under fear. Now, anonymous reporting hotlines buzzed with voices emboldened by Kesha's intervention. A junior analyst whispered to her colleague in the cafeteria, "I think things might actually change." Catherine, stripped of her foundation chair, tried to retreat into high society circles, but even there, whispers followed her. Old friends at the country club avoided her table. Invitations grew scarce. The pearls she once wielded as symbols of status now felt heavy, like shackles of a bygone arrogance. And James Sr.? He moved like a ghost through the company's halls. He still had a seat at the boardroom table, but no voice, no vote. Employees who once cowered at his presence now walked past him briskly, eyes forward. His empire had become his cage. Meanwhile, Kesha's quiet brilliance radiated across media outlets. Forbes ran a cover story, "The Woman Who Turned Humiliation into Reform, Dr. Kesha Washington." Business schools scrambled to add her confrontation with the Whitmores to their curricula. Social media crowned her Queen Kesha, a moniker she neither encouraged nor denied. But she hadn't come to destroy the Whitmores. She came to transform them. And that transformation was only just beginning. The Whitmores had always believed in the fortress of their last name, that no matter what storms raged outside, their marble walls, old money, and power would protect them. But as the days passed after the boardroom humiliation, each member of the family began to feel what it meant to be stripped of that shield. Victoria sat stiffly in a modern glass-walled training center on the 15th floor of her own company. Just a week ago, she had presided over meetings here, her word treated as law. Now, she sat among mid-level managers and senior staff, all wearing the same badge clipped to their suits, mandatory diversity and sensitivity training. The irony was vicious. The same executives who once bowed to her were now watching her squirm. The Harvard-trained facilitator, a calm but firm woman with years of experience dissecting unconscious bias, asked everyone to share examples of times they had dismissed someone unfairly. Victoria clenched her jaw. A younger manager raised his hand. Honestly? When I first saw Dr. Washington at the gala, I assumed she was someone's assistant. I realize now that was my bias showing. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. The facilitator's gaze landed on Victoria. "Ms. Whitmore, would you like to share?" Her nails dug crescents into her palms. For a long moment she refused to answer, staring at the table. But the silence stretched unbearably. Finally, in a voice tight with shame, she muttered, "I told her, the help should know their place." Gasps whispered through the group. Even here, among executives used to boardroom ruthlessness, her words sounded grotesque. Victoria swallowed hard, heat rising in her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was to be small. Marcus Jr. suffered differently. His humiliation had gone global. The clip of him mocking Kesha was now the centerpiece of a viral documentary titled, "When Privilege Collapses." Universities used it in lectures. Influencers stitched it into parody skits. His face, smirking, sneering, then pale with realization, had become a symbol of arrogance meeting reality. His LinkedIn profile was updated under Washington Capital's directive, currently participating in corporate leadership rehabilitation program following documented discriminatory conduct. It was a scarlet letter, impossible to scrub. Potential employers ghosted him. Party invitations vanished. Even his trust fund contacts dried up, law firms, hedge funds, and luxury brands all distanced themselves. His friends laughed behind his back, screens lit with his memes. One night, drunk and scrolling through TikTok, Marcus found himself watching a looped video captioned, "Imagine losing $1.2 billion in under 5 minutes because you wanted clout." He hurled his shattered phone across the room, collapsing onto his bed in despair. For the first time, he understood what his last name couldn't buy him: redemption. Catherine clung hardest to the illusion of dignity. She arrived at Kesha's office uninvited, her pearl necklace gleaming defiantly, as though armor could still be fashioned from outdated symbols. Kesha allowed her in. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. Catherine perched on the edge of a leather chair, smoothing her skirt. "Dr. Washington," she began, voice brittle but practiced. "We've clearly had our differences. But surely, as women of influence, we can find common ground. My family, our legacy, cannot simply be discarded." Kesha studied her quietly, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you know what struck me most about that night?" Catherine blinked. "What?" "You weren't shocked by your family's behavior. You were comfortable in it. You fanned yourself, clutched your pearls, and let it happen because arrogance had always served you." The older woman flinched as though slapped. Kesha leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but cutting. "Your pearls won't save you. But if you're sincere about building something new, they could mean something again, if you take them to places they've never been. Community centers. Women's shelters. Classrooms where girls don't have legacies but have dreams." Catherine sat frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. For the first time, she didn't feel superior. She felt seen. Exposed. When she left the office, her pearls felt heavier than they ever had before. And James Sr.? His punishment was the cruelest of all. He retained a board seat but without a vote. The patriarch, once feared and revered, now sat silently while decisions passed over him. At lunch, employees whispered as he walked past. "That's the man who lost the Meridian deal. Did you see the video?" He looked ready to faint. He had built his reputation on commanding rooms. Now, rooms swallowed him whole, leaving him a relic of a fallen dynasty. The Whitmores had believed humiliation would never touch them. But humiliation wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of transformation. And Dr. Kesha Washington was far from finished. The transformation of Whitmore Industries moved faster than anyone expected. Within 3 weeks, Dr. Kesha Washington's reforms began showing measurable effects. The $50 million Minority Business Development Fund had already approved its first round of grants, with small contractors and suppliers from underrepresented backgrounds receiving their first-ever Whitmore contracts. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "Whitmore Industries opens doors to new partnerships under Washington Capital's leadership." Employees whispered in the hallways, not with fear, but with cautious hope. The once oppressive culture, where promotions were reserved for those who fit the Whitmore mold, began to shift. Anonymous surveys filled with words like, "finally," and "change feels real." But progress alone wasn't enough. The world had seen the Whitmores humiliate themselves on camera. Now, the world demanded a reckoning. And so, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Victoria Whitmore sat beneath the blinding lights of a broadcast studio, her palms clammy against the mahogany desk. Across from her sat a news anchor with the sharp calm of a surgeon preparing for a difficult operation. The camera's red light blinked on. "Ms. Whitmore," the anchor began, "the world has seen the footage from your gala. They've heard your words, the help should know their place. What do you want to say to the millions who watched that moment?" Victoria's throat tightened. For days, she had rehearsed this. Her PR team, what remained of it, had drilled phrases like miscommunication and taken out of context. But Kesha had made it clear in the boardroom, if Victoria wanted to keep even a shred of her career, the apology had to be real. Genuine. Not spin. Her voice cracked as she began. "What I said that night was cruel. It was arrogant. It was racist. And it revealed more about me than I ever wanted the world to see." The anchor leaned forward. "Then why say it? Why treat Dr. Washington, a guest, with such disdain?" Victoria swallowed, her eyes shining with humiliation. "Because I thought money and power gave me the right to judge who belonged. I thought being a Whitmore meant I was untouchable. I was wrong." Clips of the broadcast exploded across Twitter and YouTube within minutes. The words, "I was wrong," trended worldwide. For the first time, Victoria's face wasn't paired with a sneer, it was paired with vulnerability. But not everyone was forgiving. Some commenters mocked her tears as crocodile tears. Others demanded more than words, apology without action is just PR. Kesha knew this too. Which was why she had orchestrated what came next. After the broadcast, Victoria was escorted not to a private car, but to a waiting SUV that drove her to a community center in Harlem. There, cameras rolled again, this time documenting her listening to stories from young black entrepreneurs funded by Whitmore's new diversity initiatives. Gone was the velvet gown, the champagne glass. Victoria wore a plain navy suit, her hair pulled back, her makeup understated. One young woman, a 24-year-old bakery owner, looked her square in the eyes and said, "Your family nearly destroyed people like me. Don't tell me you're sorry. Show me." Victoria nodded, unable to answer. For once, she didn't have a script. Meanwhile, Catherine began making quiet visits of her own. The pearls that had once symbolized her superiority now hung around her neck as she stepped into community centers and women's shelters, places she had once dismissed as beneath her. She donated, yes, but more than that, she listened. It was awkward, painful, humbling. But slowly, she began to see what Kesha meant. Pearls meant nothing unless they were carried into places of purpose. And Marcus Jr.? His public humiliation deepened. Washington Capitol mandated he host a series of live streams, not of parties or luxury watches, but of conversations with black business leaders about privilege and accountability. His followers tuned in at first for mockery, expecting him to fail. But when he admitted, live, "I thought I was the main character. That night taught me I wasn't," something shifted. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a start. And through it all, James Sr. sat in silence. Watching his family unravel. Watching his empire transform. And knowing that he, more than anyone, had let it happen. The ballroom in Chicago was a world away from the marble penthouse of the Meridian Club, yet it carried the same electricity of expectation. This time, however, the eyes weren't fixed on the Whitmores. They were fixed on Dr. Kesha Washington. The National Business Leadership Conference had invited her as the keynote speaker. The hall was filled with over 1,000 executives, investors, policymakers, and students, each one aware they were about to hear from the woman who had turned one night of humiliation into a seismic shift in corporate governance. Kesha stood at the podium in a tailored gray suit, no notes in her hands, only the weight of truth in her voice. 2 months ago, she began, I was told I didn't belong in a room. I was told my presence was a mistake. That my invitation was forged. That I should take the service elevator. The audience stirred, remembering the viral footage. Some still had the image saved on their phones, the Whitmores sneering, the crowd whispering, the moment history bent. Kesha continued, her voice steady, cutting through the silence. What those individuals didn't know was that I had already invested $1.1 billion into their company. That I was not only invited, but that I owned the very table they thought they were protecting. Ripples of laughter and applause broke out, but she lifted her hand, quieting them. But this is not a story about revenge. This is about what happens when arrogance collides with accountability. It is about how companies choose to respond when their values are tested, not in polished mission statements, but in real moments. Behind her, a screen lit up with a headline from Bloomberg, Whitmore Industries implements dignity protocol under Washington Capitol oversight. Another slide showed data, employee satisfaction rising, minority contracts awarded, public trust restored. The Whitmore family believed their name was enough, Kesha said. But names do not sustain companies. Values do. Accountability does. Inclusion does. Her voice sharpened. Power isn't what you can destroy. It's what you choose to build. The hall erupted into applause, some rising to their feet. Cameras flashed. Hashtags trended within minutes, hashtag Washington Doctrine, hashtag Build Not Break, hashtag Power with Purpose. But while the business world cheered, James Sr. sat alone in his Manhattan townhouse, the applause of Kesha's audience echoing in his mind like a death knell. The once commanding patriarch had become a ghost of himself. His calendar was empty. His phone, once buzzing with calls from senators, bankers, and CEOs, now stayed silent. His name was no longer currency. It was caution. Late that night, he sat in his study beneath portraits of 3 generations of Whitmores. His father stared sternly from a gilded frame. His grandfather, the founder of the empire, seemed to look down in silent judgment. James poured a glass of scotch, staring into the amber liquid. He whispered to the ghosts, "I did everything right. I built it. I carried it. I kept us at the top." And in one night, one woman, his voice broke, crumbling into silence. But deep down, he knew the truth. It hadn't been one woman. It had been decades of arrogance, unchecked prejudice, and the belief that wealth made him untouchable. Kesha hadn't destroyed him, he had laid the foundation for his own fall. She had only revealed it. The study felt colder than usual. He tightened his robe around his frail shoulders, the weight of legacy pressing harder than ever before. For the first time in his life, James Whitmore Sr. wondered if the Whitmore name would survive him, or if it would be remembered only as a lesson of how quickly power can crumble. The Monday following Kesha's keynote felt like the dawn of a new era inside Whitmore Industries. The lobby, once a shrine to the Whitmore name with portraits of stern-faced patriarchs looming over employees, now bore a new installation, a digital screen displaying live updates of the company's diversity and accountability dashboard. For the first time in its 100-year history, the company measured success not only by profits but by equity, tracking minority hiring, supplier diversity, and employee satisfaction. Workers who had once walked past those portraits with resentment now paused at the new screen, whispering, "This feels different." At precisely 9 a.m., Kesha entered the boardroom with her restructuring team, her presence as commanding as the first day she had walked into the Meridian Club. But this time, she wasn't there to dismantle. She was there to build. Effective immediately, she began, Dr. Patricia Williams will serve as interim CEO. The room broke into murmurs. Patricia, a Harvard MBA with 2 decades of corporate transformation under her belt, was known not for theatrics but for results. Her reputation for transparency, integrity, and cultural change preceded her. Victoria's lips parted in shock. Interim? You mean replacing me, permanently? Pending review, Kesha said calmly. Your leadership will be evaluated by performance metrics tied to culture reform. Until then, you're suspended. The words landed like a gavel. Victoria sank back into her chair, the fight leaving her body. Kesha continued, we are also appointing 3 new vice presidents, one from Howard University, one from Spelman College, and one from an indigenous-owned consultancy. Their task is to lead inclusive supplier partnerships across all divisions. The Whitmores sat frozen as names unfamiliar to them, people they would once have dismissed, were elevated to the highest ranks of their company. That evening, inside the Whitmore townhouse, the family gathered around a dining table that had hosted senators, billionaires, and kings. Now it felt like a war council of the defeated. James Sr.'s face was drawn, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. We're losing everything, he said quietly, breaking the silence. Do you understand? The name, our name, is becoming a curse instead of an asset. Victoria crossed her arms, bitterness hardening her voice. We're not losing it, Father. She's taking it from us. Marcus Jr. slammed his palm on the table. She made me a meme. Do you know what it's like to open your phone and see your face as the punchline of the whole damn internet? Catherine shushed him sharply, her pearls trembling. We are not talking about memes. We are talking about legacy. James, what are we going to do? James looked at his wife with eyes filled not with command but with defeat. What can we do? She owns more than we do. She has the board. The shareholders. The press. Even the public sentiment. Our weapons are gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, the Whitmores had nothing, no influence, no allies, no plan. Finally, Catherine's voice broke, fragile. So what then? We just surrender? James lowered his gaze, his voice a whisper. We adapt. Or we disappear. And as the Whitmores sat in their gilded prison, stewing in humiliation and fear, Kesha Washington stood on the roof of her midtown office, overlooking the skyline. The city that once belonged to old money now pulsed with new possibilities. She checked her steel watch, her constant reminder of time, precision, and purpose. The Whitmores had thought they were untouchable. Now they were the example, the case study, the warning. And she had only just begun to rewrite what power looked like in corporate America. The Whitmores' townhouse had become a mausoleum of silence. Curtains stayed drawn. Calls went unanswered. Their name, once whispered with envy across Manhattan, now trended only as satire online. James Sr. sat alone in his study, staring at a portrait of his grandfather. The founder's painted eyes seemed to glare at him, judging. A century of power, squandered in 45 minutes of arrogance. He poured another scotch, his hand trembling. But James was not a man who went quietly. The next morning, he arrived at Whitmore Industries headquarters unannounced, flanked by 2 longtime family advisors. Word spread through the building like wildfire, the old man is here. He strode into the boardroom, demanding the attention of executives and shareholders already assembled for a quarterly review. His voice shook with desperation, but it still carried the echo of a patriarch who had once commanded empires. For generations, he began, this company bore our name. It was built on Whitmore grit, Whitmore sacrifice, Whitmore excellence. And now we're being told we must apologize for it? That we must surrender it? His eyes swept the room. I won't stand for it. A few heads nodded out of habit, but most remained still. Some glanced toward the door, waiting. And then the door opened. Kesha Washington entered, steel watch glinting in the light. The room seemed to realign around her. Calm, collected, she took her seat at the head of the table, the place where James had sat for decades. Mr. Whitmore, she said evenly, are you finished? His jaw tightened. You may control the board. You may control the shareholders. But you don't control the Whitmore name. That legacy is ours. Kesha studied him for a long moment, then reached into her folder. She withdrew a document and slid it across the polished wood. Not anymore. James stared down. His hands shook as he read. The letterhead bore Washington Capital's insignia. The language was precise, devastating, Whitmore Industries to undergo official rebranding. Effective next quarter, the company will operate as Meridian Washington Industries. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the shareholders shifted in their seats. The Whitmore name, their final shield, was being stripped from the building itself. James's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Kesha leaned forward, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. Mr. Whitmore, your name is no longer an asset. It's a liability. It trends with racism, arrogance, and downfall. Investors want distance. Consumers demand change. The board has already voted. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the room desperately, but no allies remained. Even his oldest supporters lowered their eyes. Kesha's tone softened, but it cut even deeper. Your family thought power was about keeping others out. But true power is building something bigger than yourself. That's why the Whitmore legacy ends here, and a new one begins. James slumped back, the fight draining from him. For the first time in his life, he looked small. Months later, the company's headquarters bore a new name, Meridian Washington Industries. The lobby portraits of Whitmore patriarchs were replaced with a mural depicting diverse faces, workers, entrepreneurs, communities the company now served. Victoria, still humbled, completed her mandatory sensitivity training and began working quietly under Patricia Williams, learning from the woman she once would have dismissed. Catherine's pearls no longer glittered at charity galas, they now hung at her neck as she spoke in inner-city classrooms, mentoring young women on leadership. And Marcus Jr.? His podcast, Privilege Check, gained traction, not for arrogance, but for honesty. In one viral episode, he admitted, "The night I thought I was the star, I realized I was the fool. And the woman I mocked turned out to be my boss." As for James Sr., he rarely appeared in public again. But when he did, it was not at banquets or fundraisers. It was at his granddaughter's school, watching a new generation grow without the burden of a name once considered untouchable. 2 years later, Kesha stood at the United Nations Global Compact Assembly, delivering the keynote to leaders from 40 nations. "Power," she said, her voice steady, "is not about what you can destroy. It's about what you choose to build. I was underestimated in a room full of billionaires. They tried to strip me of dignity. Instead, they lost their own. And in that loss, they found something more valuable than money: accountability. Transformation. Legacy redefined." The applause thundered for minutes. And in that moment it was clear, the Whitmore dynasty had ended. But in its ashes, Kesha Washington had built something greater, an empire of dignity, equity, and unshakable power. The marble floors of the Meridian Club still gleamed, but now they reflected not arrogance, but possibility. The world would never forget the night the Whitmores mocked the wrong woman, and how she turned humiliation into history. In the end, the Whitmore family learned the most expensive lesson of their lives: power without dignity is no power at all. What they tried to destroy in a moment of arrogance became the very reason their empire collapsed. Dr. Kesha Washington showed the world that true strength isn't in wealth or legacy, but in choosing to build, not break. What about you? Have you ever seen arrogance come crashing down in real life? Share your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it. And if this story inspired you, subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories where truth, justice, and dignity rise above arrogance. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss the next chapter.